on? Can you hear me okay? Perfect. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us at this Brussels Blockchain Week panel discussing how does Europe manage risks derived from DLT use case in financial services without stifling innovation. My name is Kathryn Carlson. I am a journalist covering EU financial services for MLex here in Brussels. So I'll set the scene a little bit for today's discussion with some info from the current landscape. A recent report by the Global Financial Markets Association argues that financial markets could save more than $100 billion per year in freed collateral and other balance sheet efficiencies if DLT was used more widely, with use cases including DLT-powered clearing and settlement, custody, and asset servicing and lifecycle management. But those opportunities are not without risks. The Financial Stability Board has said that decentralized finance, in which DLT plays a key role, might present risks to financial stability, with concerns including money laundering and terrorist financing, concentration risk in technology and protocols used, cybersecurity incidents, and increased risks to financial stability from crypto assets. In the EU, the European Commission has called DLT a transformative and foundational technology, including in the financial sector, but has identified issues to scaling up the use of DLT, including the interoperability between networks needed, the scale required to cater to the needs of global capital markets, and a lack of legal certainty for operators. Its suite of recent regulation, including the MiCA regulation, the DLT pilot regime, the tightening of rules around crypto marketing, and extension of anti-money laundering rules to the crypto sector, aim to address some of the identified risks while fostering innovation for DeFi in the EU. So where do we stand now, and where are we going when it comes to balancing the benefits and risks presented by DLT? How can we create more harmonized rules and find a balance between innovation and regulation, which addresses the potential risks of the technology? And how can we ensure financial stability and consumer protection while boosting competition and innovation, and foster dialogue and collaboration between industry, civil society, and regulators to manage this balance of benefits and risks? Those are the issues we're going to dive in today, but first of all, let's meet our panel. So today we're welcoming Mariana de la Roche, Senior Regulatory Affairs Expert at the IOTA Foundation, Shehram Khattak, Legal Counsel at Consensus, and Joachim Schwerin, Principal Economist at the Digital Transformation Unit from the Commission's DG GROW. So I'll throw it over to you guys first for your opening remarks and introductions. Let's start with Joachim.
Okay, thanks very much for having me here and for the interest in the topic. I know that there's a lot of talk about risks, but it's always wrong to start with risks. We start with opportunities. We have here a very young technology that is around for less than 14 years. It came to us in 2008, end of 2008, beginning of 2009, at the height of the financial crisis. Financial crisis is the epitome of centralized risks and everything that can go wrong with centralized risks, including bringing whole economies down. Bitcoin started the trajectory towards the use of blockchain that created a huge opportunity space. But it's not only about a technology. Blockchain is a movement. Blockchain is about a way to decentralized approach of organizing societies and of enabling the small players, the small enterprises, everyone, to engage on a global scale with a trustworthy technology. That is new, because we have a lot of stuff out there that we have already seen for centuries, if not millennia. Take cooperatives. DAOs are nothing else than cooperatives, just in a digital way, allowing them to scale at basically very limited cost. Same applies to distributed ledger technology as such. Ledgers have been around for centuries. Everyone has been using them. Now we put them in a very simple way in the digital domain. There's nothing difficult to understand about these things. So in a way, this technology is quite simple, but at the same time, it's a radical enabler for a completely new way of decentralizing our economic activities, which means that they are much more democratic. That is why we have taken a very positive approach. I will not go into more details in my introductory remarks because we will have an interesting discussion on that. But just one thing. In 2015, 2016, that was less than 7 years before the technology emerged, we decided at European level that this is one of 4 breakthrough technologies which we see as an innovation priority for all policy fields in the future. We have never had in the history, both of European institutions, but also, more broadly speaking, in our European history, any technology that within 7 years of coming into existence has been endorsed very broadly as something that is full of opportunities. And the risks, they are there, but they are grossly exaggerated. I've seen the slide in the previous keynote. I've been sitting in the Anti-Money Laundering and Fighting Terrorist Finance Committee for a number of years, and I can tell you that we have more than 80 risks. Crypto is no serious risk among them. There are these instances, but the big risks, we know them, they are cash, they are traditional financial markets, there are all sorts of mechanisms. Yes, there are problems in crypto, but we need to see the perspective. And by the way, we have a very positive attitude towards cash. We have a very positive attitude towards building capital markets in Europe. We should, the more, and we're doing that, have a very positive attitude towards crypto, and that's precisely what we're doing, not only with Miko, but also in general terms.
Thank you. I'll hand it over to Mariana.
Thank you, everyone. It's always nice to have Joachim because we have a similar point of view there. And I was also going to actually reinforce the fact of seeing blockchain and DLT more as an opportunity, and actually how this technology can help us to address challenges and problems that we have already in society for decades, and we have not been capable of actually doing something about it because there are systemic issues. So actually, more than starting with the risk, it's more like an invitation also to the regulators to check what are actually the risks that are bringing with the technology itself, and what are those that are part of the misconceptions. It was mentioned also in the slides before, and this is really a problem, and especially with the AMLR, for example, that you just mentioned it. The fact that the thresholds that we are planning to implement with crypto are lower than for cash, considering that cash is actually still the main source of money laundering and financing of terrorism. It just comes also for the lack of understanding of the technology and how actually the technology can enhance more transparency and traceability of the transactions, so we can actually prevent this kind of risk. So I'm also not going to go more into details because I guess we are going to discuss it, but I think that we need to differentiate, and it comes also with education, not only to the general population, but also to the regulatory bodies about what are actually the risks and what are the risks we think that are there just because of what we see on the media, and for one or two or isolated cases that we are seeing that sometimes are not even the fault of the technology, but actually human error.
Okay, thank you. And Shehram?
Thank you. I'll just keep it short. Firstly, thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for attending. And I guess in this heat as well, it's quite tricky. For my part, I think what's really interesting is just hearing all our peers being so open and transparent, and seeing this space as an opportunity. From my perspective, coming from industry, I'm obviously wholly invested in blockchain, and so in that respect, I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. And very heartening, again, to see that the regulators are looking at it as an opportunity rather than, I guess, how some other regulators may be looking at it.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, guys. So let's get into it. I'm interested to know, because we're hearing so much about different DLT use cases, different technologies that rely on the underlying blockchain, DLT, whatever your terminology is. But what are we actually talking about when we talk about DLT use cases in financial services? What are the key ways that this technology can be used? I don't know who wants to jump in here. Joachim?
I think it's good to start with finance, because at the end of the day, Bitcoin started with finance as the first cryptocurrency. Now, when we made that statement that I've just referred to, we were mostly referring to blockchain as the underlying technology for use cases in the real economy. We think that blockchain has a lot of good use cases in finance, and that includes the enabling of better financing for small and medium-sized enterprises, better access for retail investors to opportunities to use their own money, etc. And we support that a lot. But I think the bottom line is that the technology can do so much more, because basically it enables everyone to engage with like-minded people, to develop in a sort of way that was started with crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, crowd innovation. People everywhere that share the same preferences and engage in business independent of the location by the trustworthiness of the technology as such. We are actually, and that is something that I would like to stress from the beginning, not only talking. So you see what we are doing in finance, you see the MiCA, but we are also building. The Commission has been active for at least 10 years in building, let's say, the requirements that we have for blockchain systems and application. And for 5 years, we have started building also blockchain infrastructures, for example, to detect fake products. That is something where we are very much advanced, which we bring out in the next 2 years. We are basically from the source of a product or a service. We can verify the original product. We can trace it. We use NFTs for that through the whole journey until the end consumer. and we can have the data in a verifiable way encoded on a blockchain. This is just one example of things that we are discussing here. If anyone thinks that either for finance or the real economy, blockchain is something that is not here to stay, it's not only wrong, but it neglects completely what we are doing in a very broad field, starting with finance and then moving in the real economy domain. We are building the skill sets. We are supporting in very much length the effort to educate and skill people for the necessary work that they have to do using the blockchains. We are building our own use cases, as said. And on finance, we think that in a situation where 75% of the financing of small and medium-sized enterprises in Europe comes through the banking sector, that was during the financial crisis, that is still the case today, which is much bigger in the rest of the world. We need to urgently find alternative ways of giving access to funding for startups, for enterprises using the latest technology, and blockchain is an ideal means to do so. We see it everywhere. Last remark perhaps on finance, if you think that this is about the legacy system, if you think that this is about capital markets and banks, this would ignore what we see in the world also in terms of competitiveness. We have in the meantime each and every country, as small as it might be, as I'm not using the word retarded, but as backward as it might seem, being much more innovative in many ways than we are here in Europe using that technology, because basically the only thing that you need is a tiny platform that can be your smartphone, that can be whatever, and it can directly use the services for financing, but also for the real economy applications. And there is no way going back to this, including that we are not in a position to prohibit anything. This train is long gone, because this is a fully global technology. The speed of innovation is higher than everything we've seen in history, and I'm an economic historian, I know what I'm talking about. So at the end of the day, the only thing that we can do is moving cleverly with the space, using the opportunity in finance and the real economy, but we are not the ones who prohibit anything.
Shehram, any thoughts there? What does DLT use cases mean to you?
It's a very comprehensive overview that difficult to add. I think the way, I guess the way that I would look at it is, at a high level, anytime you need to trust something, someone, an intermediary, that is a space where potentially blockchain can be deployed. Going into each and every use case is difficult, and you did a fantastic job elucidating some of the use cases. So, I think the way that you would do it is say, transparency, autonomy, and trustlessness. If those things are required in a project or transaction, that's where you would deploy a blockchain. Off the top of my head, if I think of an example that's not financial services related, consider hospitals. So if I'm from England, so if I'm in London, and I go to a hospital there, and then I want to go to a hospital in Newcastle, I have to request the London hospital to send the information to Newcastle. There's not a shared database. So a blockchain could be effectively used there. Now, of course, you're talking about permissionless and privacy concerns and things of that sort. But I think those kind of principles set your guiding North Star, as it were.
Thank you. And Mariana, same question.
Well, actually, it's not there, but I'm also part of the board of directors of INADPA, and I've been leading the social impact and sustainability working group for the past 3 years. So use cases is basically what we have been seeing, because we actually are trying to not only give more visibility, but actually understand what is the potential of the technology in different areas. You were talking about the DPP, I assume for FCA and also in education was the CHASE project. But if you just want to check only what we can do at the supply chain, there is different areas where blockchain can actually have an application. So we have projects in the mining industry where we are trying to understand by actually via data that we are collecting in sensors and digital twins, what is actually the environmental impact of the mine in the areas that they are located, to also understand how we can make the mine industry more sustainable, but also adapt the mining industry to the climate change challenges that we are facing lately. So that's only one intervention where we actually are working in cooperation with 7 mines in Europe so they can share the data in a transparent, trustworthy place. And this would be possible without actually blockchain because they don't trust each other. They're actually in competition. So this is only one, and this is at the very beginning of the supply chain. There is the raw material extraction. There is like also the Iota Origin project in Africa, which is doing something similar, but in conflict areas where it's really important to pay attention where and how we are extracting minerals also for human rights protection. And then if you go a little bit beyond, you have like everything in regards to the DPP, the Digital Product Passport, that is also being implemented in Europe, but it's also a project implemented between Uganda and the UK, where they're like actually like trying to accelerate the processes in how you cross borders merchandise, so the merchandise doesn't get like bad imports, but also support countries in the African region to be more competitive in the international market. And then overall, you can also like track the carbon emissions through the supply chain and provide this information in a more accurate way for climate researchers and institutions. And at the top of that, you can actually enhance blockchain to actually activate sustainable economies and more circular economies, understanding how is actually the whole life cycle of the product and which are the areas and pain points where you can actually intervene thanks to the data that you are collecting during the whole time that are going to make these solutions more sustainable. And this is only talking about supply chain. If we go also when we were talking about like NFTs, we have seen like how NFTs, especially on the carbon market, are helping us to avoid double accounting and greenwashing and actually like give more guarantee to investors to get into this market. So I think that there is an universe of use cases that we can discuss here for like hours. And what I would like to remark, and also like especially because of the topic of this panel, is that of course any of these use cases have certain risk, but like any industry has it. And the important thing is actually to work in cooperation with like different partners from the regulators, like the academia, to actually understand even the sandbox. I think that is a really good tool to actually like see how we can actually deploy these projects and try to prevent and mitigate the risks that are coming during the deploying of the project, as you will do in any other industry.
Right. So when we're talking about risks, it seems that we're identifying, we have a bundle of different technologies, we have a bundle of different uses, they are separate but related. When we're talking about the European approach to managing the risks while trying to increase innovation, so whether that's regulation, whether that's industry projects, how do we offset that balance? Should we be approaching these technologies as a cohesive whole and trying to support them, regulate them together, or should we be separating them out into different cases?
Probably the starting point, if you look at regulation, is that you need to have the policymakers, the regulators, educated about what's going on. You need to understand this technology. You need to understand the various combinations and recombinations of what you can do. And you have to dive very deep into all the layers of blockchain systems in order to understand that. And we have several layers. At the end of the day, we are not talking here about the work of economists. We are not talking about the work of lawyers or technologists. We are talking here of a coming together of all these aspects on code, on programming, on the really fundamental layers, where you have to be able, when you see a line of code, to interpret that at the same time in legal, economic context. And the context is decisive because it matters very much in what context you see something. So that requires a huge learning effort every day, which is probably the biggest problem that we face, because still after that time, 10, 15 years, we have a very limited number of people that really understand the technology. Whereas most people, including those that take the decisions, listen to the mainstream news channels and see news that, in my opinion, to a large extent, sorry to say that, is at best misinformed, if not fake. And that is something where I think we need to urgently deal with that. The second problem is that we are not used any longer to take decisions ourselves, and I'm not blaming anyone. What we have since the last 200, 250 years in terms of intermediaries taking decisions for you is a historical anomaly. In the past, when you look at human history, people have been living in local contexts and they were taking decisions together in communities. And then we started this division of labor and going to all the details. And the intermediaries that at the beginning were there to serve you, to inform you, to help you, have grown into a huge system that tells you what to do. If I, with my experience, go to my Belgian bank, the first thing they tell me is that don't do this, this is too dangerous for you, it's my money. So at the end of the day, I want to take my decisions. Of course, when I go into the decentralized space, when I try to act in a mature way and I go into a very new, experimental, innovative area, I need to be careful. If I see something that sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. The normal principles apply. If someone promises me for an NFT full of bullshit a return of whatever within a year, I should not take it. But who is there to blame? Should I call the Prime Minister? This is me to blame if I go into the system at the end of the day, but we are not used to that any longer. And this is something where we need to build that. We are not blind of the risks. But the reason why we have not, for example, put DeFi or other decentralized things into MiCA is not because we don't know what it is. It is because we think that from a risk-based approach, the risks that we see do not merit at this stage the regulation because we see that the opportunities outweigh the risks. Of course, things like Terra Luna, like FTX, like other things happen. And I cannot put them all into the same basket. But Terra Luna as an arithmetic stablecoin for me is a positive event because it is a learning experience that helps us to build better systems. FTX is a slightly different story. There are also other stories around there. But at the end of the day, if you think after 13, 14 years that a supersonic airplane has been flying after the first guy just for a couple of meters went on some field in an airplane, you will not have understood history. These things happen at the start of each and every technology. We are just not used any longer to put that into perspective. And this is what we're trying to do. So we work selectively on understanding the risks. For stablecoins in MiCA, we have made a very clear assessment that we need some forms of governance, we need the reserves, we need a couple of things that are present, but read it from the side that we have not prohibited anything. We just set out certain rules that we think are self-evident, and that applies to a lot of other things. So I would say that's the bottom line when you start that. That is what people have to understand, and you have to become a little bit more modest as a policymaker and regulator, because you cannot sit on your chair and wait for 5 years and say that, oh, today I regulate this, because then you will be 10 generations further. And if you think that I'm exaggerating, look at artificial intelligence, where you even have it further accelerated, where you have 3 generations perhaps in 1 year, and that is the future. We need to build a completely different space to govern this, and the only thing that this can work is in a decentralized, connected manner, not top-down.
Okay. Can I jump in?
Yes, please, go.
I think that like that can be summarized under the proportionality principle, which is clear there. And I agree with you that the regulators need to be educated and like need to be proactive, but I also think that like is part of the industry to also be proactive and approach the regulators and actually like have an open dialogue. Because as you said, like one thing is just like looking at what is going on from the outside. The other is just like actually being in a room with those that are building the technology and can talk to you not only about what they're doing, but also the challenges that they're facing and how they can overcome it. Like we did that exercise a month ago. You were part of it, and I think like Peter is also here, where we actually like see people from our community that are working on NFTs, tokenization, and self-hosted wallets, and we sit them with like regulators for them to have a dialogue of like where do we stand, how regulation can impact us, but like also how we can help to address some of the risk and some of the challenges that the regulators are seeing in regards to particular developments in the technology. And this was actually a really interesting discussion, and at the end the conclusion was that one is we cannot just like come with like really strong regulation that is going to actually stop innovation, in particular in Europe, but like actually we just need to join the industry and work with them and see what is going on and where actually potential intervention might be needed, also considering that the space has been like really proactive, if I myself, I'm more proactive than other industries, and try to self-regulate itself. And they're creating standards and certifications that are like not like a mandatory thing to comply, but actually are coming from the industry, for the industry, by the industry, to actually like give more security to users and to investors. If you look at smart contracts, that's what we are right now. So when you come with like example, Data Act with like a really strong regulation that I believe it doesn't really understand what a smart contract is, you are not actually helping the industry or anyone else. You're actually like blocking innovation without bringing any benefit. And in particular in Europe, and I'm happy you mentioned it, Joachim, as well, because like basically, and this was like at the core of like what blockchain and DLT was at the beginning, is like giving back the power to the people. And this is really important when you talk about like financial inclusion. And I was wondering, like, I'm originally from Colombia, and I was just like seeing how use cases and actually like adoption is happening faster, even at the governmental level in Latin American countries, especially El Salvador, for example. And it's actually because they have the need. Because the economical system there is not really working. They don't have the same protection or systems that we have here in Europe, and people really needed to find like other ways to do it, and they couldn't wait that like every rule was set for them. They just needed to be proactive, like, and start like innovating and see how this works. And that's why we see so many things going on right now in Latin America where there is adoption at the governmental level. So I think that like these are like really particular points that when we look at blockchain, this is not only helping us to address systemic issues, but it's also a global movement. And we need to see what is going on the different regions and see how we can bring the best practices and implement it in our region. Also, there's no like magic recipe that you can copy and paste, but like see how we adapt what is going on in other places.
Okay. So we're talking about best practices, and in terms of, I think we're essentially all trying to move forward, navigate these emerging technologies. Not everybody has all of the answers. What does industry need regulators to know for moving forward and regulating the space without, as we say in the panel, stifling innovation? I don't know if, Shehram, you might have something to weigh in on here.
I think that one of the big concerns that, certainly from my perspective, is if an industry player starts to go down a roadmap and implementing a business model, launching a certain product, and they're obviously heavily invested in that. They've committed resources of different forms. And so if a regulator or a jurisdiction then turns around, say, close to a decade later, and says, oh, actually, that's all illegal, it's quite difficult to swallow. And it also means that it stifles innovation, because then everybody else is there saying, okay, well, I don't know how to progress. I don't know how to move forward. So again, it's very heartening to hear the commentary about taking a thoughtful and transparent route forward. I actually agree with both panelists. I agree with what you were saying about innovation and regulation not stifling it, and creating an environment where you have certainty as to how you can progress. And equally, I also agree that it has to be iterative. If you mandate regulation today, it will be wrong tomorrow, or people will try to circumvent it. That will always happen. And so there has to be some hubris involved on both sides of the conversation, where you recognize we're all learning, we're all exploring, and that will continue. I mean, even in financial services, it continues to this day, and that's a very old system.
Can I briefly reply to that? We take that very seriously, and I'm talking to entrepreneurs every day because we understand the business logic. We know that you invest resources, and you know that you need to have a certain certainty. What we try to implement are these safeguards. I would call them rails. So on the one hand side, if you do anything in crypto and it is a security, you fall under the established system. You are under MiFID. If you are not, you fall under MiCA, and MiCA should be seen from the exemptions and from the things that are excluded. For me, the most revolutionary part of MiCA is actually how we treat utility coins. So those tokens that are not primarily financial, because there we have reversed the burden of proof. When you launch something, you send a white paper, which is not a prospectus, to your national regulator, and then within a reasonable period, a couple of weeks, very short, you can launch, and the burden of proof is to the regulator to demonstrate, to prove that you are doing something wrong. So you don't wait endlessly, and we have legal standards for that. That is the first time in financial regulation at all that we have reversed the burden of proof. And not only that, you have directly the passport for 30 countries. We have 27 countries in the EU, plus the 3 EEA countries that take our rules, 30 countries where you can immediately launch your product. That is revolutionary. And that is something I said, it's not primarily financial, because in the future, we will have to leave the financial space. If you think that the financial space is a problem, you would, in a couple of years back, that we go back to the financial space, because the financial space is relatively clear with its rules. In the real economy, you have all sorts of regulations, directive, guidelines, etc., that apply in a sectorial approach that is much more complex to deal with that politically than with the financial system. But the starting point must be a similar approach, that we must place the burden of proof to those entities that are responsible for that. And the entity responsible for that at the end of the day is not primarily, in my view, the businesses. It's those people that know the risks, but then not a wash list of 50 risks, but then very concise, well-defined risks with experience, with the necessary standards to then decide upon that. And we must grab them there. And the best way, and that is a message to all of you, how we can grab them is by demonstrating that it is something useful that we do. I have now been very much in, I would say, support of everything crypto. What I do not like is some arrogant people in the crypto space that think they are living on a different planet, they are using resources, and they do whatever they want in order to grow rich in a very short time, and the benefit is theirs. The benefit is not theirs. We talk here about communities. We talk here about decentralized spaces. When you do a project, you should demonstrate the benefit to other people, to the normal citizens, to the small enterprises, to the startups, what you deliver. If you do that, and the better you do that, the more difficult it is for those people in the legacy system and the established system to fight against that, because then you have the people with you, and the people is exactly what drives the space.
So touching on this point, Mariana, what kind of a balance do you think we need to be able to strike to move forward, managing risks, encouraging innovation? What kind of a balance do you think we need between top-down regulation and industry self-regulation?
Well, I wouldn't try to change that, because top-down regulation is exactly what we don't need, because that means there was no dialogue with the industry. I guess that the worst example that we are seeing in how to do it is in the US, where actually the current situation is managing because of fear, and it's fear that is coming mostly for a mistake that was a human mistake. It has nothing to do with the technology. And this lack of clarity and this kind of decision, rash decisions with hot mind, is exactly what we need to prevent, because that's where I see the major risk. I really like the approach that we are...
Just to clarify, when you talk about the situation in the US, are you referring to the SEC's recent lawsuits?
I'm just referring to a couple, but we can talk about FTX if you want.
Right.
the most meaningful that I can think, where it has nothing to do with the technology. It was actually a human delivery mistake, and then we just wash our hands, blaming the technology that was behind, because there was a lack of understanding of how it works, and for the media it's easy to manage it that way. So I think that in that regards, that's where the real risk is just trying to regulate based on fear, or actually do regulation fast, just to try to prevent things without a proportionality principle. In the case of Europe, I really like the approach, because it has been really, really different. There's a lot of dialogues, there's a lot of consultations where the industry is invited to the table to participate. Some of those conversations are also open conversations where you can not only talk about the risk but the potential. I think that it was the proposal for the digitalization of Europe that came of the Commission in 2021 that actually mentioned blockchain, DLT, digital twins, AI as the technologies that we need to start using to actually do the digital transformation that is so much needed in Europe, which gains major impact with what the current situation we have with dependency of energy in Russia, for example, especially in Germany. So all of this is a different approach that we haven't seen in Europe, and I will hope that that's the one that we keep moving forward, because as Joachim said, DeFi and NFTs were on purpose left out of MiCAR. This was not a mistake on oversee on the regulators. It's just there's not a need to actually go in this direction right now. We are actually starting to see what is going on with especially with DeFi, what is the potential that DeFi can bring, how we can actually do financial inclusion and all the governance structures that are coming there to actually empower communities. We are just starting to see this, so there's no need right now to regulate, because the risk that is posing is minimum. If you want to talk about the AMLR, the risks are minimum at this moment, when you see in comparison to actually cash or other payment methods. So I will say that at least Europe is in the right path, and I guess that my only concern is start to see influence from other regions that are actually regulating based on fear and misinformation, in particular for the media or influencers or social media, and that this started to damage a little bit the process that we have been having here.
So I'm going to throw it open to audience questions in a second, but just before that, very briefly, I think we've all seen the recent SEC court cases against Binance and Coinbase. What do we think this means for Europe? I mean, is this evidence that we need to be regulating crypto assets and blockchain technologies differently, or any thoughts on this situation?
I think with the US, the way that I'm looking at it is from what's their driver, what's the purpose. I think that the political establishment in the US has taken a view on the space in a political manner in terms of, well, what do US citizens want and need? I think that the SEC is maybe just somewhat maybe kind of blurring the lines in between kind of its role as a regulator and then its role as a political participant. So that may be something which I perhaps disagree with, but in any case, I think that's where they're coming from, right? They feel that this is a space which is not serving their citizens well. Do with that what you will, right? Like, a different establishment may have a different view. And in Europe, I think we do take a different view in that we think that this is a technology that empowers citizens. It is a technology that the citizens are asking for.
Yes.
I don't think this is a brand new technology. If you follow the breadcrumb trail, I think whatever Bitcoin represents, it came from something. It goes back, I believe, to the 70s where this stuff was being talked about in academic literature. But there is a paradigm shift, a generational shift in how we are viewing autonomy, transparency, gatekeepers, and intermediaries, which perhaps wasn't around in the 70s.
Okay. We are running out of time, but any quick remarks from Joachim before we open it to audience questions?
I can completely agree to that, and I must honestly say that I'm not commenting what they do in the US. It's their right to do what they do. I think you gave a very good reply to that. I have not understood yet what the problem with Coinbase is supposed to be. I have not yet understood what the problem with the mixers is supposed to be, because I think people have rights in terms of their data trails. I'm not commenting on the other things. At the end of the day, what we know and what we hear from businesses is that now a lot of them are looking into Europe to, as they say, and they said it yesterday, to hedge their risks. They don't know what will happen in the US, so they come to us. This is good for us. This is good for competitiveness. I hope they get it right over there, but at the end of the day, our approach indeed is we explain them what we think is the minimum of rules that we can reasonably expect, and then they can do their things. We don't think that an enabler or a regulator, to put it that way, a regulator should sit in an office and wait for someone to come in, asking for advice or information, and then before that person goes out, I decide whether to arrest that guy or not. That is not the division of labor that we have in Europe.
So in our last couple of minutes, do we have any questions from the audience? Yeah, go ahead. Oh,
Yeah. Yes.
Does that therefore present an opportunity for reform in regulation to also accelerate alongside blockchain DLT use cases? And if so, sorry for the double-barreled question, what would be the number one thing that you would reform first?
That's what I would reform first, is to develop some basic understanding of what are the requirements for those things like NFTs that can have the applications in the real economy. What in terms of especially collective liability. I believe that our civil law is not fit for the job any longer, because our tradition is to grab individual people, to make them individually responsible, and then to base our system on that. If we take seriously what we're saying here, we have collective spaces. And when you enter collective space, you have a collective responsibility that should not be the responsibility of a single person, but of the entity. But that also means that if you program something, if you help someone in coding something, you again, only because you're known, are not the person who takes the responsibility. I think we need to establish a sort of approach where you can have more choice for yourself, but at the same time understand that, and that's my personal opinion, I'm not saying for any other people, that as an individual you are important, but without the collective you are nothing. And therefore I think the next regulation should probably be a horizontal one that looks into DeFi, that looks into DAOs, that looks into everything decentralized, but again, in order to create clarity and not in order to prevent. We need to find new legal standards for collectives. We don't have them.
Okay.
Can I build on that? Because I think that that goes like really in like the direction that we have discussed a lot like lately, and it's like self-sovereign identities and the tokenization of identities. And I think that is more about the perception of like how and where do we need to identify the people concretely. Like for example, when you, we have been exploring like different solutions when you can actually like do identification processes and then tokenize the identity without actually connecting the data to protect like GDPR. But then you have like what we will call like some identity on demand. That means that you don't need to be identified all the time. It's just in the case that there is suspicion of like an illegal activity that the party can actually be able to identify you without have like access to the identity all the time. And I think that this is actually like something completely new that actually like blockchain in particular, tokenization and self-sovereign identities are bringing that change completely how anti-money laundering and financing of terrorism has been working historically.
Any final closing thoughts from our panelists before we wrap up? No? Okay. I guess we dealt with all the issues in this session. Thank you so much for joining us today, and let's have a round of applause for our panelists.